is possible to reprogram your reality from something that you do not desire or no longer desire to something that you do desire. Because, we all have days when our job sucks. I don't care really what job it is. There's, things that happen along the way. Nobody's life is perfect, ever. Ever. I mean, you look at some of these celebrity people and look at Michael Jordan. One of the most famous, amazing ball players of all time. And his father was murdered. That's a horrible, horrible tragedy in somebody's life. Some people would never even survive that if that happened to them. So, just saying that whatever it is you desire, just know that, and I'm not saying that if you wish good things, then bad things automatically are going to happen to you. I'm just saying that no one is exempt. Okay? So, and that also means that we all have the choice and ability to, alter what our perception is, just ever so slightly. And that could include new routines, new habits, how to develop those when we're stuck in a rut. Yeah. But not the easiest thing to do, but it is possible. So, let me think. What else did I want to get out of here? Again, not sure where this video is going. Maybe just a vlog note to myself. I'll run out of recording time if I'm not careful. Jesus by Jack Handy. You ever watch that on Saturday Night Live? That's sometimes how I feel when I do this. Like, what? But, sometimes it's good to talk these things out, especially those of us who, live alone or spend, work from home, spend the majority of time, not socializing with peers necessarily. When I worked in a corporate office, I had a peer group that we were constantly bouncing things off of each other. So, that is useful. But if you're trying to achieve something different, then you have to potentially find a different peer group to maybe bounce those things off of to get stronger. And finding a peer group, obviously, that you trust. Like when you're working in a corporate environment, it's a little bit safer, to share ideas and things like that. However, don't overwork yourself. Because the thing is, especially if you're somebody who acts as a mentor or a trainer to others, you can end up becoming so dependent upon as a subject matter expert that you actually aren't able to do anything else except provide information to other people so that they can do their jobs, whereas your job assignment may be more than just being the subject matter expert. It's actually then using your subject matter expertise to further develop your own skill. And that's something that the corporate environment failed upon me, and they even went so far as to tell me a master's in business administration with a specification in finance when I was working in the accounting department at Caterpillar. They told me that I didn't have enough leadership experience to obtain an interview for a position that I was highly qualified for, and even my boss said that she saw me doing. Now, I had just been back from medical leave, so I didn't expect to get the job, to be honest, but I did expect the courtesy of an interview. And when I was not even chosen for an interview out of 5 candidates for actually 2 positions, the other one I would have been fine and qualified for. And in fact, I was the mentor and trainer for the current supervisor of one of the groups. And then I became the advisor, the chief advisor, of course, right? He's calling me, putting meetings on my calendar all the time of my new boss, whom I old supervisor said, well, you can't leave, you can't go anywhere, you have to help him. And I'm thinking, well, it's not, that wasn't my job that's being left. She was leaving the job, not me. Like, really? Again, I enjoyed the role of mentoring people when I was in a role where that was actually part of my job description. Like when I was a project leader, part of my job was to mentor people. And then, since I was non-supervisory management at the time, part of my job, and I held that, that was around my 10-year mark at Caterpillar when I was salary rate 22. After progressing, I started at 14, which those jobs were later reclassified as 19s after I had moved out of the department. So I went from a 14 to a 20. After I left, they also created a 21, which I was performing that at a 20 as well before I got promoted to the 22. And then when I applied for an internal supervisor position as a 24, they were not interested in interviewing people inside the organization. They were interested in interviewing people outside the organization. So I had to go to a different business unit in order to find another position at Caterpillar where they, hired me, because I'm good at what I do. And I already had some experience under my belt. So I actually that was a salary rate 23. And then I was later promoted to the 24. But I was already doing the testing type of work. It was just in a different system and on a different system. So I already understood, the basics of requirements, programming, and testing in order for system efficiency to be executed for the organization. Okay. So these projects that are highly well-funded, I'm talking about by the 7th floor, they're all, funded by executives for multi-million-dollar projects that green books are created for. I did monthly budgets on our ERP system for SAP. I was a project manager at that time, even as a 23, and doing my subject matter expert job. So that was another leadership, when I wasn't actually formally training people to be better employees as a project leader. And then I was the one who my supervisor would come in and interview me about these people and say, hey, how are they doing on their work? Because I'm the one who actually saw the results and not just, from a numbers perspective, because we did keep a lot of statistics and numbers and things like that, but they actually wanted my verbal thoughts and opinions about how these people were developing. Now, to me, that's leadership. Just in that job alone, when I was a salary grade 22, and then I had somebody telling me when I was already a 24, which in order to even become a 24, which they promoted me to the year prior, which there's a lot of there's even supervisors at the 22 level. So again, if I did not have leadership expertise or experience, then I would never have been promoted into those roles in the first place. And then when I complained to HR, all they said is, well, what makes you think you have leadership experience? So obviously nothing was taken into account with my education, my work history. It was just, well, and she even said, well, what did the manager say? And it's like, well, this is what I'm coming to complain about the manager and to do some kind of investigation on it through HR. And I don't think any investigation was done whatsoever. And then I had a medical episode in April of the year that I got fired. And up until then, my new supervisor told me that he did not notice any issues with my performance. Even though, he was the one asking me all the questions and, I mean, he was asking questions on statuses of other people as well, but, I wasn't withholding information from him. I was, doing my job as people should in an organization for the benefit of the organization. Okay. And then when I became ill was never even prescribed the proper medication by multiple doctors, actually, even though I had diagnoses from other doctors, and I was trying to explain to them what my symptoms were. They were highly ignored. And I only recently have gotten which Caterpillar knows about my post-traumatic stress disorder, because every time that I applied for a job, they asked if you have any of the following conditions. And there were times when I did not put it in, but then I started putting it in and let them know that, yes, I have post-traumatic stress disorder. So they wanted to know this information when I was going through the HR system. But when I actually had claims going on medically, and I wanted to put in for a leave of absence, which I was having issues doing because of my ADHD that I was diagnosed with, actually by more than one physician, but it's very difficult to get the proper medication, and because people abuse it as well. So, and there's shortages of Adderall, if nobody's heard, and I did try Ritalin, which was terrible, so I quit that. Anyway, so yes, when the time came for me to be able to exercise my right to use my earned benefits that I had worked, without complaint for Caterpillar for 18 years, and then they just turn around and say, actually, no, and check your email and you're out of here. And that was when I was actually responding to a family emergency that my father, who was a diabetic, and he's old enough for me to have to be, I'm 44 years old. I'm not a young woman that's 20 something with young parents. I have elderly parents. So I kind of dropped everything I was doing and went to drive him to his appointments, and at the same time I was wanting to put my leave of absence letter to submit it to Caterpillar, because one of the things upon our return to office with my clinically diagnosed, this has been in my chart forever, PTSD, not alone, not even including the ADHD yet. Okay, so I had a restraining order that was dropped against a person that lived in the town where my office was, because at the time they didn't live in that town, but when they decided to, show up where my office is, I need a new restraining order in order to do that. And even I had to switch hairdressers, because when I was driving over to that town, I was getting panic attacks just to get my hair done. So it was very difficult for me, and especially, again, not having the correct medication that would make me have nausea and diarrhea all morning long, which I was able to manage working from home in between phone calls, but in an office to have to run in the middle of meetings or in between meetings, it was very, very hard. And I also had the acid reflux stuff happening with it too. It was both sides. And that was one of the things that I would complain to the doctor about. And, because it was like Zoloft and stuff, and which is very common. Sertraline, it's a very common side effect. I've talked to enough people about it now. And, he's like, well, there's this, blah, 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 but it's not covered by your insurance. It's like, okay, well, there just was not an offer of a lot of options. Once I went to a different psychiatrist, after I was fired, by the way, when I finally got into a different psychiatrist, after I was fired, I finally got into a different psychiatrist. And then we were able to try a couple different things and make some progress after I had been fired already. So then I have this person, though, who's judging me, trying to diagnose me with borderline personality disorder when I already had PTSD. I still had that ADHD diagnosis, and it was confirmed by a second physician. They would not, then that's when we tried the Ritalin. Well, the Ritalin didn't work for me. So anyway, and I was just paying out of pocket for that. Then in So I ended up being hospitalized due to me not being on the correct medication, and which we've gotten a couple different ones now, and I feel happy with I'm taking it consistently so far. Again, this is something that I wanted to get sorted out with Caterpillar during the leave of absence because of the digestion problems, the consuming food, which I have to be able to nourish my body, but if everything is going out the other end, which I complained about profusely while I was in the hospital just this past April, and I, complained to the doctors about the dosages that they were giving me because I have a very sensitive reaction to medicine, and I went with a follow-up for another doctor, and after the hospital, and they were kind of telling me these same things and not really listening to me. They just said, well, if you have stomach issues, then you just need to go to an internist or a GP and then basically, try and get some more medicine. And it's like, no, taking another pill is not the answer for me here in this situation. It still isn't helping me function like I need to. I need to be able to function without pooping my pants 5 times a night, which is what would happen after I would take this medicine. That's too much. Anyway, apparently for some people, spending their whole life on the toilet is acceptable. It's not for me. And it's also not acceptable when you're in an office environment. And God forbid I was a line worker out in a factory who has to ask their boss if they can even go to the bathroom because there's things moving on a line. How is that person supposed to go to the bathroom? Every 45 minutes, every 30 minutes on these medicines that I complained about. And the doctor just said, he didn't even look in his computer, he just threw the paper away. Like, here, return to work, you're okay. So that's why I was doing, trying other natural things and searching for new doctors, which with the ADHD is very difficult. And when things are emotionally dysregulated in your body, it is very hard to go forward with things because all I have is, then it's like the anxiety around it. And that's when I would start to get the panic attacks. And then it's like, well, now I'm really not functioning. And then, things around my house would start to fail. Like falling behind on my laundry and dishes, because then I would get depressed. And then it's like this horrible cycle. So I had to get I had to get myself out of the cycle, just like that. Which I hired a couple different health coaches, both of them helped me in different ways. My motion coach, she helped me the most, I would say. And after, and clinically it makes sense as well. And if you've ever heard of the book, The Body Keeps the Score, you know that there is trauma that is stored in the body. Now, she helped me with the emotional freedom technique, also known as tapping. And while I was on medical leave, I was actually able to visit her out in Colorado. She lives in Washington State, and I was able to visit her out in Colorado. And I also traveled for a wedding to Minnesota. And then a friend of mine, her birthday was one weekend, and she drove me up to some concerts and whatever. Anyway, some pictures, were on my Facebook of these events, and then work while I was on medical leave. So this was, I was originally on medical leave, and again, I was fully taking my medication when I was on medical leave. Like, I took my medication religiously because I wanted to make sure I was able to function on this medicine and, do my things at home. And I'm just talking about, like, feeding myself, taking out the garbage, not sleeping all day, not puking, and puking because of the upset stomach and things of that nature. And, it also made me feel like very, like, bitter and angry towards it. I was a very emotionless. I didn't like being on it because it was very, like, anti-emotion. Like, I these extended doses, it is just too much for me on my system. Lord have mercy, I'm just trying to wipe my glasses off here. They're blowing me off the road. Sometimes these semis are like, ugh. I have a certain point that I'm trying to make it today, and while I have the energy and it's good daylight, good driving conditions, like I need to make it to my point. And then also, since it's still daylight, I'm really not that far away from it. I will actually get some decent rest because sleep is like a huge thing. And like before I went into the hospital for the first time, I was wearing one of those health watches, and just that week before, I was only averaging like 4 hours of sleep per day, which if you're working full time and taking care of yourself, or at least attempting to take care of yourself, that is not healthy. 6, 7, 8 hours, 9 hours even is more, and this was something where it was getting so bad. It's like I wasn't even doing catch-up sleep on the weekend. It was just, that's how my life was becoming. And because I was so stressed out and anxious and the running thoughts and like the ADHD brain, so it's like once I get focused in on something, then I was like, I couldn't stop thinking about it. This is also like why I was very good at my job at Caterpillar. They called me the defect queen because I found the most problems and issues in the SAP system when we were testing it more than any of the other testers. And you can ask anybody there and they will tell you the same thing. And the person who trained me used to call me Eagle Eyes because I would find all the mistakes in the proofreading, because I was in the technical information department and it was my job to update it according to the engineer specifications and make sure it looked correct, everything for the, consumer, customers and dealers to use. So that included all the extra things like spelling and, just like, is it the right-hand side or the left-hand side? Like, I had to check and validate all those kind of things. So, I became intimately acquainted with the machines, which I knew nothing about up until those jobs. But I was just given the blueprints and, that's in a system and, I learned it. And that was the same as the ERP system. I was completely new to SAP, to SAP. In Germany, they call it SAP, but in the United States, we call it SAP. And it is a warehousing system that has multiple modules. I actually just interviewed with somebody over in Rivian for a consulting position, which they seem pretty excited about it, but I'm just not sure at this point, Well, they want somebody really full-time. I'm looking more for some contract work anyway to be better in line with some of my other businesses. So, and that's another thing too, is that Caterpillar denied after, my really glowing service reputation and quality of work. They denied my unemployment. So the business that I had starting up, I had more bumps in the road because, as everyone knows, everything has been going up in price, and I did not, I had already been in the logistics department for like 10 years, so I told the supervisor, who it should be no surprise if they weren't going to promote me, that I would be looking for a job somewhere else, Caterpillar. So to me, their firing at that point was just a formality, and because they didn't want to promote me to even give me an interview for something that I was highly qualified for, and multiple people recommended for me. But, that's not how the manager chose to, and the manager, hiring manager, he chose 5 candidates. And, I'll just say some of those candidates still can't even perform at of not having the proper medication dialed in, the stress of not having the restraining order in place, and the stress of, I had some other things at home that had happened, like security-wise. I had a break-in. That's why this restraining order was in place. I had a break-in, and during COVID, it was very difficult to get anybody to come and do work. So it took an extra long time for that all to be secured, and I had to deal with the courts and things like that again. Yet nobody commented on my job performance as being negative until I was hospitalized both times. So, and I will say the last time when I had a family emergency for my elderly father, who is a diabetic, fucking diabetic, people. He already has outlived his father by 5 years. Okay? Do you understand what that means? Anyway, I was there taking those appointments, and I half expected HR to call the security number, who is my mother's telephone number, to see like why I hadn't reported to work, but nobody called to check and see what had happened to me. I did receive a text, I believe, from my supervisor, and then it said check your email, but after you are out of the system, you can't get into your email. So then I was told, I can't remember how I was told, that I had to drop off my stuff. So the communication, there was no formal communication around it. And I think I had even said something to my supervisor and to HR about, taking a leave of absence, and they were kind of, against the suggestion, although I thought it was well within my rights, considering the health issues that I still had going on with the medication not being correct, and with the personal safety issue that I had, because I didn't want to be coming over to work in Morton, Illinois, Morton, Illinois, where this abusive person who, there's, you can look it up in the system, he did damage at my home, and then I was going to have to be coming to that town where he now lived, and I didn't want him showing up in the parking lot. Up until that time too, he was still using my mailing address, even like through the state of Illinois. So I think he was still trying to maintain some residency at my house in the hopes that he could come back, or try and scam some money, or to do something. I'm not sure what, but I had to speak to the post office on more than one occasion. I think I called the state one time also. So I'm doing these things, and yet Caterpillar's like, you're fired, and also you don't get any safety net, even though you have a glowing reputation and did nothing but work your ass off for us for 18 years. So that's the story from my perspective. To me, that's a fail. I think I even did appeal through the state again. I was very upset during the time. I fell into a very deep depression. I was still able to maintain my business, although I had struggles with that as well, because I didn't have the right paperwork in line with the city of Peoria and like Peoria County with my business. So I had to pause that for a while, and again, not having any unemployment insurance, which I felt like I was entitled to, was very stressful. So some of the ways that I was able to earn money, I turned to short-term gigs, such as driving Uber, making grocery deliveries. So I was still trying to work. I also sold some investments that I had, which I didn't want to do, but that was without touching my 401k, which they say you're supposed to be able to do that in case of undue financial burden, which, you know, to me is almost ironic considering the people that caused me the undue financial burden is Caterpillar, by denying me a simple unemployment benefit that really cost them nothing, except their reputation. Anyway, I know a lot of good people that have been fired from Caterpillar, so it doesn't necessarily surprise me. But what did surprise me is the level of advocacy that I've had to try and do for myself, which has been very difficult to do when you're sick. Now, if I had a broken arm or cancer or something like that, I feel like there would be maybe somebody, even in my family, or I don't know, somebody that would advocate for me more versus just, oh, go do it yourself. Just go do it yourself. You'll figure out. Just go do it yourself. That's been the answer for everything. And, you know, it's very difficult to get things done if there's only, you know, I'm only one person with two hands. So, and it's also very emotional. So now I'm making this video, which is going on to 35 minutes. Whew. I am coming up on the anniversary of being fired, so. And this may sound strange to some people, but I am clairaudient, which means, you know, doctors like to say, oh, you're hearing voices, you're delusional. No, it's not like that. Nobody's telling me to go kill somebody and I'm going to go do it. Like, that's fucking idiocy, okay? I mean, I've never committed any crimes of that sort, you know. And the worst I've had on my record is a speeding ticket. I've never even been, you know, pulled over on DUI charges or anything of that nature. You know, I'm a very responsible person. You know, I went to college. I have a master's degree. Like, you know, so it's unfortunate that now that I'm away from my full-time job is the only time that I have to, you know, address things. And, you know, I actually, you know, kind of liked my job, you know, because there's problem solving. It was something different every day. It was interesting. You know, I mean, yeah, I did start to get burnout. My former supervisor, actually, she started having adrenal gland failure, so she left. And at the same time she left, my mentor that I was assigned, he took an early retirement package. And that was actually the first time that I started taking anything for medicine, like for my mental health. And I started taking like CBD and like L-tryptophan, magnesium. I started, you know, getting my vitamins measured and things like that before I ever went to psych meds. But that was not until after I had the traumatic experience of this break-in with this abusive person that I had to get the restraining order on. And I will say that that happened like on a Saturday, and I returned to work as if nothing happened on, you know, Monday. Nobody even really knew. You know, it was, you know, I took care of business. I went, you know, to the court. I missed, you know, like, you know, I had like a 9 a.m. video call with the court, and they granted me, you know, the emergency restraining order, and that was that. You know, and then it was like I didn't stop or take any time off after that event happened. I just kept working and unmedicated. And then it was a year later that all of these events and things that happened, they started boiling over. And then thought that meant that I was going to get out of there faster, and then I ended up missing working on Cinco de Mayo. I had a gig scheduled. I'm a musician as well, so I had a gig scheduled that day. I was not able to play. The doctors would not release me, although they were not giving me anything during the day. Only the sleeping medicine at night, which I was trying to be compliant with because I wanted to get out of there and go back home. That's all I wanted to do was go back home and go to sleep anyway. I mean, the police coaxed me out of my home. I was inside my home trying to get rest to begin with. Which is funny because when, my Vivint alarm went off, again, prior to my hospitalization, my first hospitalization, it was almost like 6 weeks prior to me getting hospitalized. That alarm went off at 3 in the morning, no cops came, and Vivint still wants money from me, even though I canceled the service after that because I was so mad. And this was, during the time when I had an active restraining order on someone. Again, I just went back to work the next day, and I'm trying to deal with all these things. And so it was about a year of that. And again, I was unable to secure the doors in my house because Allstate, they made me go through the courts first, and then they only wanted to give me $1,600 out of $5,000. And of course they said that the offender had to pay for it, and I was like, well, the offender doesn't have any money. And then even just getting a contract from the time that I paid and I paid upfront in full $3,000 to Lowe's, and it took them 7.5 months to install 4 doors. That's it, in a house locally in town in Peoria where there is a Lowe's. This is not like I live out 30 minutes out of town or something. So, during that time, before those doors had been restored, that were beaten down by the offender, they were rattling, I didn't feel secure. I was worried that person was going to come back, even though I had a restraining order, because he had been trying to contact me for random reasons, like saying, oh, will you talk to my daughter, one more time, or hey, there's some mail here, or I don't think you're safe there alone. Then he, told me that, oh, by the way, so-and-so died. There was always these little things trying to make an excuse to get him access. And again, like I said, he was still using, through the state of Illinois, he was using my mailing address for up to 2 years after he was physically removed. And I'll say this was by the second time because there was a prior incident of domestic battery that he was arrested for. Unfortunately, the next day, the police they never asked me if I wanted to press charges or anything. I didn't really even know my rights as an individual at that point in time. But it had happened, and so at that point in time, I was stuck living in my house with an abusive individual who I know would beat me up severely. And I was working, and it took me at least 3 months to figure out a plan and kind of make sure I had all my ducks in a row, even though it was my house. Looking back now, I should have just called the sheriff's department, but I did get him kicked out, and then he came back and angrily, while I was there, angrily intimidated me from the outside of the house first, of course, tried to break the front door down, some of the windows in the front,